Welcome to the NJ Criminal Podcast and part 4 in this series.
And it brings us to another car case. Everything's in the car these days.
It is.
State v. Jamal Wade, who again, he's stopped in a car. He's got a gun. It's a murder case. It's a Patterson murder case. And you had mentioned the CDW, the communications data warrant. It's a GPS case. It's a cell phone tower case, making cell phone calls, GPS in a stolen vehicle, and a lot of technology surrounding this case that brings us to a case that's been addressed at the Aptiv and now heading for the Supreme Court.
Right. Yeah, this is Appellate Division, Judges Alvarez and Geiger. I appeared before Judge Alvarez for a number of years when she was in the Superior Court down in Cape May. She and he wrote the opinion, which looks, as you said, like it's going to be heading for the New Jersey Supreme Court because just a few weeks ago, November 19th, the court granted cert on the issue of, on a Miranda issue. So, and whether or not the defendant, Mr. Wade, who contended that he was not informed of the nature of charges against him or that he was under arrest, whether he knowingly and voluntarily waived his Miranda rights. So the Appellate Division had found no error in admitting his statement in trial, and he's obviously taken it up. So, this was, like you said, happened up in Patterson. And, basically, this is a murder case, a shooting case. He, September 2016, there's this dark-colored Audi sedan who pulls up next to the victim's vehicle, Mr. Gee. Several shots are fired into Gee's car, fatally wounding him. Patterson Police Department reviewed surveillance videos. They recovered footage from a neighborhood liquor store that captured the faces of two men they believed were involved. And listen, this reads like several cases that I have right now. It's this, like you said a few minutes ago, this, police generally get surveillance video anytime there's a shooting from the area. And there's, in this case, there's a city camera that's got some footage that records the victim walking towards his vehicle, that you can see the Audi pull up. You can see, somebody get out of the Audi, fire shots into the victim's vehicle, get back into the sedan and speed off. There is a detective who basically identified Mr. Wade as the driver of the sedan, and a Mr. Allen as the passenger and the shooter. And ultimately, the state had made an application to admit that identification in a trial that was granted by the trial court. So there was additional footage recovered from the area. As part of the investigation, the police got a communication data warrant, basically authorizing installation of a signal monitoring and GPS tracking device to allow members of the New Jersey State Police and law enforcement to instantly and continuously track the position and location of this black Audi, with a particular license plate for a period of 30 days. And that was basically part of, an investigation into automobile thefts that had been going on. So, once they learned that, a dark-colored sedan had been involved in this particular shooting, they went back and they had reviewed GPS data, and they learned that the police had been tracking a stolen dark-colored 2012 Audi sedan that had been parked near the scene of the shooting at the time it occurred. So, basically there had been this separate investigation going on, and the police that were investigating the shooting were able to, use that information to, to basically find out the direction of travel after the Audi left the scene of the shooting. And so basically they get additional surveillance footage to see who got out of the vehicle after they find out where it went. And, they see, the car being wiped off, the door handles being wiped off with a cloth. And, so you got all this surveillance evidence, all this GPS evidence that they're able to tell exactly the position of the car. So this goes on and on and on, and they see later that night, that the individuals had gone into a liquor store with these two guys in this Audi. They get surveillance from the liquor store, and they again determine that the driver who entered the liquor store was this Mr. Wade. Later in that footage, there was a Honda that pulled up in front of the liquor store. So this whole case is based on surveillance and GPS. And a man who appeared to be, wearing, the same clothing as the passenger shooter. Actually, this surveillance, was before the shooting. And they were able to identify that individual as Allen. And so, long and short of it, they track Wade down. They stop him. They put him in handcuffs. They grab 2 cell phones off of his person. They tell him he's under arrest for murder. Gun, by the way, never recovered. And they take him back to the detective bureau for an interview, and they videotaped the interview. He was not handcuffed. And basically the detective says, "So we told you why you're here." Wade nods his head. Detective reads him his Miranda rights, gets him to sign the waiver form, right? He does. Wade acknowledges when he's being read Miranda that he understands what's going on. So detective says, "So if you want to speak to us, you're going to have to waive your rights." Wade says, "I have a lawyer, though." Detective says, "You have a lawyer?" He says, "Yeah." Detective says, "So you want a lawyer?" Wade says, "I got a lawyer. I don't let me talk to him." And this goes on, and they have this exchange. The other detective's like, "Does he have a lawyer for something else, or you?" And Wade says, "He's paid for everything. I got a case in Delaware, a case here. He's paid for everything." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So then the first detective says, "All right, so you don't want to speak to us without your lawyer? Is that what you're saying?" And he said, "There's nothing to be mad at. I'm a man." And detective says, "All right, well, you're going to have to wait to speak." And Wade says, "Yeah, but I got a lawyer. You said I'm under arrest, right?" Detective says, "No, I didn't say you're under arrest." And Wade says, "You just read me my rights." The other detective says, it hasn't been charged with anything. And and the first detective says, "Yeah, you have not been charged with anything yet." So Wade says, "So then talk. I don't need to tell you shit if I ain't under arrest. I know I ain't do nothing wrong." And then the detective said, "Are you verbally agreeing to speak with us?" He says, "Yeah, I'm a man." And they said, "Without your lawyer?" And clarify, are you verbally agreeing to speak to you, to us, it should be with us, without your lawyer? And he says, "Yeah, verbally. I think you think I'm stupid." And then ultimately goes through and signs the Miranda form and gives a statement. And they question him. He claims he was drinking at the liquor store. He claims that he learned the victim had been shot. He acknowledges what he was wearing. Goes on and on like he knew who the guy was. He identifies the victim. Then the detectives are like, "Wait a second, you've been lying. We have surveillance video footage from the liquor store. We know what you were doing. We know where you were going." They go through all of this and, says, "Look, at this point, all you can do is help yourself." Wade claims he was, that they were telling him fabricated stories and requests to speak to his lawyer because this just got bad. Detective continues to speak with him, ultimately go back and forth. Wade requests his lawyer again after the detective tells him, we know you didn't do it by yourself, and then they cease questioning him, and then he gets charged. And, there's a lot of discussion about the rest of the GPS evidence, and, before trial, obviously the state, moves to introduce his statement at trial in their case in chief, and that's always the obligation of the state to file that motion. A lot of attorneys, prosecutors and defense attorneys, kind of get that mixed up, but it's always the state's obligation to show that a statement was obtained knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily in compliance with Miranda. And trial court says that he voluntarily and knowingly waived his Miranda rights and ruled that his statement was admissible at trial. And then they have some, pretrial motions regarding, the CDW, and that gets admitted. But essentially on appeal, Mr. Wade, now basically says that the statement never should have come in because the police never informed him of the charges he was facing, and that they lied to him when they told him he wasn't under arrest, right? And, after an analysis of Miranda and the rules in New Jersey related to Miranda, the appellate division says no error in admitting his statement at trial. He had not yet been charged or indicted when he was interviewed. And so basically found that when they told him you hadn't been charged, that was accurate. He hadn't been charged. And that the record fully supported the findings that he knew he was a suspect, he understood his Miranda rights, that he, voluntarily, knowingly, intelligently waived those rights. He, hadn't exercised his right to remain silent. To speak to an attorney or have one present and voluntarily give a statement to the detectives. Now, as I read that exchange, I am a little bit confused as to why there was not a discussion, or at least an appeal by the defendant, Mr. Wade, about the fact that as I read that exchange, he had asked for a lawyer several different times, but that didn't seem to be the subject of the analysis by the appellate division, probably because it wasn't raised by Wade's attorney. I'm curious if when the New Jersey Supreme Court decides this case, whether or not there's any discussion about that fact. The issue of, when I used to teach at the academy when I was a prosecutor, there's a little bit of a different standard for police to follow when you compare a defendant's right to remain silent versus their right to request a lawyer, because that Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and, the Sixth Amendment right to counsel, that gets analyzed under a different standard. The rules when a suspect asks for a lawyer, all questioning is supposed to stop. And at least that's how I always taught it. When a defendant, as opposed to when a defendant, asserts the right to remain silent, whether it's equivocal or unequivocal, at that point a detective should clarify whether or not they're actually remaining silent or not. But, anytime I review a statement by a client and they at any point use the word attorney or counsel or, lawyer, all questioning, in my opinion, ought to stop. So we'll see. I'm a little uncertain. And again, we don't obviously get the whole transcript when we read these opinions, but I was curious about that.
Right. Agreed. It is an interesting issue. I love the colloquy. I remember the stories more than I remember the names of the cases. And this is going to be an interesting one. And I bet you'll have a lot of factual recitation in the Supreme Court's opinion that hopefully, again, will shape policing and shape policy as it relates to Miranda.
Yeah, and I should just add. Before we conclude on that, it should just be noted that the New Jersey Supreme Court also granted cert on October 8th in State versus Abayuba-Rivas. And the issue there that they're going to look at is whether the suppression of the defendant's statement to police, related to a violation of his right to counsel required suppression of a later statement to the police made the following day. And that's a really kind of long, convoluted, complicated case where the defendant gave like a bunch of statements, and he was ultimately indicted for killing his wife in a very gruesome murder, but a whole bunch of statements, and in several of them, it touched upon his, the trial court had suppressed, I think, at least one of his statements because of that right to counsel. So, it'll be interesting to read the New Jersey Supreme Court's decision in that case in conjunction with their decision in Wade.
Very interesting. I didn't read that one coming up, but I will take a look and look forward to maybe the court will put these together and, as they've done so many times, and try to get a unified rule out of a couple of important cases.
Don't forget to subscribe and like the show on iTunes, Spotify, and anywhere you listen.